Reading from Chapter 12, Splayed Feet, an Ecological Adaptation of Mountain Populations, in Tradition and Transformation, Studies on Cordillera Indigenous Culture, 2nd edition, by June Prill-Brett, edited by Delphine Tolentino Jr. In 1904, George Skinner reported on his observations of splayed feet, or deformity of the feet, among the Tagalog bugadores who steered the casco boats plying the Pasig River. These boatmen steered the boats upstream using long bamboo poles, with most of the pressure applied on their hands and feet. This occupation led to the disfigurement of their feet. Skinner remarked, "These boats' cascos may throw some light on the peculiar foot deformity one is tempted to call, but as such, feet are very useful to their owners in plying their peculiar vocation. One must consider that feet of this formation are an attempt on the part of nature to adapt these people to their occupation." A year later, another anthropologist, Albert Jenks, not only noted the high incidence of splayed feet among the Bontoc, an estimated 20% of the adult population, but also called attention to other Filipino groups with the same characteristics. He observed the same phenomenon among coastal peoples who frequently climbed coconut trees by, quote, walking up them with their great toes and the tips of one or two smaller toes thrust in small notches cut in the trunk, unquote. He also found this characteristic among the horse-riding Sulu and Lanao Muslims in the vicinity of Lake Lanao, southern Philippines. These people were said to use stirrups, which they made in such a way that the upright passed between the great toe. This peculiar stirrup necessitated a spreading of the great toe from the others and was believed by Jenks to cause this type of abnormality. He wrote, "Everywhere in Manila, there are men and women with splayed feet who have never worked on cascos. 3 women in Manila whom I have just met on the street and with whom I have spoken have toes that turn inward greatly, and none of them could give a reason for this abnormality." Jenks supported Skinner's theory that this phenomenon is not hereditary, but he also argued that this splaying of the toes is not a result of any one occupation, but a natural tendency of pressure, such as working and moving around on unshod or bare feet, to weaken the basal joints, thus causing this deformity. Splayed feet was noted to have been common not only in the Philippines, but also elsewhere in Asia. It was earlier reported among the peoples of India, Indochina, Sumatra, and Japan. This splayed feet phenomenon is still present among the traditional mountain terracers of Bontoc and some other Cordillera groups. This paper argues that the divergence of the hallux, or splayed feet, results from the local people's continuous ascending and descending of the mountain paths that are usually close to 70 degrees in slope. People in this region usually climb up and down steep slopes with a heavy load carried on the head or shoulders. In this type of terrain, the toes are used as a brake to prevent the person from sliding down the slippery paths, especially during the rainy season. This repeated braking action puts tremendous pressure on the big toe. Although the skeletal anatomy of the human foot is not adapted to opposability of the big toe, a considerable degree of inward divergence has been observed among the population under the study. It is not unusual to see toes facing inward, one foot usually exhibiting a wider splay than the other. The Bontoc occupy the central Cordillera of northern Luzon. They are traditional wet rice terracers whose ecological niche is rugged mountainous terrain of 3,000 to 500 feet above sea level, with scattered mountain streams which are diverted through irrigation canals and wooden troughs into the artificial pond fields. There is no means of transporting harvest from the fields to the village except by manual labor. Both sexes engage in this activity. In negotiating mountain paths, the dexterity of the toes and feet is essential since the hands are also used to support the load. The bontok must rely heavily on their toes and feet, most especially when going downhill. They must dig their big toe into the earth or wedge it on tree roots or buried rocks for support to avoid sliding down the mountain. It has also been observed among the same mountain population that the toe deformity is absent among babies and children. This factor was also noticed by Jenks at the turn of the century. He wrote, "I have never seen it," or referring to splayed feet, "in children under 9 years of age, and any inquiries have failed to reveal babies or small children within turning toes." This deformity is not found among people engaged in non-traditional occupations such as school teachers, clerks, nurses, soldiers, salesgirls, guards, and students, and those who habitually wear shoes. This deformity is also absent among children, as Jenks had observed. The degree of divergence of big toe, or hallux divergence angle, appears to be gradual in its development, in that the angle varies with the length of time a person is exposed to a traditional subsistence occupation. Subsistence activities all require mountain climbing and include commuting to and from the rice terraces, hunting, and transporting firewood. Many older male subjects exhibit splayed feet due to their employment as cargadores without footwear during the early American administration of the Cordillera. The degree of hallux divergence increases with the age of the person involved in subsistence activities or cargador occupations without foot protection. A traditional bontok who is from 70 to 80 years old, for example, will most likely exhibit a higher degree of hallux divergence than his son or daughter who is 30 to 40 years old, provided they are faced with the same ecological conditions. Another postulate is that hallux divergence angle is not sex-specific, but varies according to the length of time a person is engaged in traditional occupations. A bontok woman carries as much weight on her head as the bontok male on his shoulders in proportion to her size. Lastly, it is postulated that the hallux divergence angle will also depend on the altitude and ruggedness of the local terrain. It is likely that a sample drawn from another bontok village whose settlement is situated on less terrain hostile to the pedestrian will exhibit a lower hallux divergence angle than those coming from a rugged terrain. Jenks's earlier hypothesis that the explanation for splayed feet among the bontok is occupational rather than genetic is supported by statistical analysis of data that were gathered by this writer from bontok population in 1968. As earlier stated, the aim was specifically to test if the phenomenon of splayed feet was correlated with occupation as an adaptation to their environment, and to check if genetics plays an important role in this phenomenon. The common denominator among the Southeast Asian groups who were reported to exhibit splayed feet would appear to be occupations which entail activities without footwear and where pressure is exerted on the big toe. This phenomenon was noted among the populations engaged in coconut tree climbing, horse riding among the Sulu and Lanao Muslims, casco boat propelling, and the wet rice terracing Bontocs. All these samples were engaged in traditional activities without footwear and subjected to weakened basal joints. This paper is just a preliminary attempt in this area of study and should be followed up by using a more rigorous research design.